Who's the most overrated person in history? Tutankhamun. He is the most well-known pharaoh, together with Cleopatra VII, but he did literally nothing and died aged 18. He didn't even rule over Egypt a full year before he died, but everyone knows about him. His grave has been of huge importance to us understanding ancient Egypt, but he himself is way more famous than he should be. Amenhotep III, Thutmose IV, Akhenaten and Hatshepsut are all more deserving of the fame Tutankhamun has. Tutankhamun is famous because of the death mask and the other treasures found in his tomb back in the 1920s. It was uncommon for a tomb to be untouched, as they were usually robbed shortly after. It signalized a revival of interest in Egyptology, so at least we can attribute that to him even if didn't do much in life. I was kind of annoyed when they finally made a show set in ancient Egypt, and of course it was about Tutankhamun, Tut 2015. At least the circumstances surrounding Tut and the time period was interesting, as he lived during the reign of and was most likely the son of Akhenaten. I thought it was funny that in the show he's like a good-looking 25-year-old capable of fighting and riding into battle, when in real life he was a cripple. Mary Baker Eddy. Founder of the Christian Science Church, which is not Christian or scientific. Founded a religion based on her idea that illness is unreal, you can pray your way to healing, and if you can't you must not be spiritual enough. Then she died of pneumonia, but people still fall for her cult. Following her has killed several of my family members prematurely, and will take more of them I'm sure, because they didn't believe in medical science, so for me she is the most overrated person in history. For sure. Mihai Eminescu, a Romanian poet. Every literature teacher you will ever meet in Romania will be kissing his ass, hailing him as the only good poet we ever had. Everyone else is trash, only Eminescu is worthy of attention. He was a very talented man, yes, but also an extremely pretentious fuckboy of the everyone else is stupid, I'm the only smart one mentality. I was so fucking tired of studying him all of high school, and every other writer in existence being compared to him. It made me hate poetry as a whole. Yeah, one of my history professors in college said that if only Hitler's genius had abandoned him along with his sanity, Germany might have collapsed at least 2 years before it actually did. I took issue with that, because I think Hitler was a moron, but in terms of manipulation, he really was a genius. Also, don't even bother trying to read Mein Kampf. We had to read a chapter for a history on the Holocaust, and I only made it 3 pages. Even saying it might have been a bad translation does not describe how shitty that book was. There's no way anyone actually read it all the way through. It's unreadable. Tesla's wireless energy idea was a pipe dream at best and a straight-up scam at worst. Light, and the whole electromagnetic spectrum, disperse relative to the inverse square. As distance increases, the lost energy scales so quickly that wireless power over more than a few millimeters is not practical. It's why wireless chargers require physical contact with the device. If you used a transmitter with enough juice to charge a phone anywhere in a room, your skin would start to cook like you were in a microwave. But hey, your phone would be charged. It's also the same law that causes radio stations to have a limited range, get too far from the broadcaster, and the signal is so decayed that it's indistinguishable from cosmic background radiation. I'm not saying Edison wasn't scummy, but Tesla's ideas about global wireless power are solidly in the realm of science fiction based off what we know today about physics. Tesla would have provided free energy to the entire planet, but Edison cut the funding because they couldn't charge us by the unit with wireless energy systems. It wouldn't have worked. Even if the money was there, the tech itself wouldn't have worked. Radio waves lose energy over distance very quickly, and in soil/water even more so. Before you argue, do you really think if it was a practical system someone wouldn't have figured out how to sell it? You have all these remote locations. Oil rigs, factories with no neighbors, military bases. If this was really a better way to do it compared to wires, why hasn't someone made a killing selling it? A good rule of thumb is radio waves lose energy on Earth about exp, A*F, where F is frequency and A is a material constant. Wires lose so little energy that no one outside of the utility companies has to even consider it. Routinely I have dealt with feeder cables that have over 99% efficiency. If there was a just God in heaven, Columbus would have died at sea as an object lesson in what happens when you deny thoroughly established science. People didn't think Columbus was a dumbass for believing the world was round. Any educated person in 1492 knew the earth was round. The Greeks figured that shit out 2000 years before MR and MRS. Columbus wasted a blowjob conceiving Chris. The people of Europe, correctly, thought he was a moron because he drastically miscalculated how large the world was. He thought he could sail to Asia by going west because he thought our planet was way smaller than it is. Everyone else with half a brain said, "No dipshit, you're going to die in the middle of the ocean if you try that." And he should have. Instead, he's the luckiest motherfucker who ever lived, and he stumbled ass backwards into an entire other continent full of gold and technologically inferior natives, who he proceeded to pillage, rape and murder. Oh, and he discovered the New World? Must have been a surprise to the millions of people already living there, and also the Vikings. Movies used to be much more about types and playing a specific character archetype, rather than today where we want them to transform into the character. You'd find someone you knew could play the Marine, or the cowboy, or whatever, and cast them. Or, during the studio system, which was beginning to end when Wayne was starting, you'd put them in dozens of things, many movies a year, playing basically the same role with a different plot, different CO stars. Actors were as much tradesmen as artists, in a lot of ways. Sometimes you hire an architect to design a house as the expression of something greater, an artistic achievement, falling water. Sometimes you hire the local guy who's built dozens of them before to build you just what he made the last time. I have to disagree, though this is a popular opinion on Reddit. For what it's worth, I'm an atheist. She first went to India as a teenager and was struck by the absolute destitute poverty she saw in Calcutta, so much so that she devoted her entire adult life to trying to address it. She was a teenaged Albanian nun who ended up helping millions. Most of the criticisms of her come from Christopher Hitchens' book on atheism, and all of them are second-hand accounts of things she apparently said. His point in writing that chapter on her was not to discredit her work, it was to point out that she was a regular fallible person, not a saint who worked miracles. The main criticisms I've seen: she told dying people that their suffering brought them closer to God, and some say she baptized them on their deathbed when they couldn't really consent. I'm not sure why this is controversial. She was a Christian who devoted her life to God and would have believed in the afterlife. Telling dying people that they would soon be in paradise would have been a comfort to some, no. Was it right for her to baptize people against their will? No, but I don't think it really changed anything either. I'd have to say Columbus for reasons that are obvious to most. Arguably Chairman Mao or Mussolini, as they're both worshipped by a large number of people to this day in their respective countries, despite the rest of the world realizing that they were fucked up and largely incompetent. Yeah, Mao was a decent commander, but he was incompetent at everything else. Perhaps Hitler. People mostly admit he was fucked, but many are under the impression he was some sort of tactical, political, and economic genius at the same time when he wasn't any of those things. He was just an angry racist with no morality to speak of, which allowed him to burn down the Reichstag and lie about it for power. Hands down Donald Trump. An incompetent, malodorous, inept buffoon with literally not a single redeeming quality to him, yet he is revered with a cult-like religious fervor by many. I have honestly tried to think of a single positive to his personality, and the only thing I could come up with was he makes good material for comedians. That's it. There is nothing else about this guy that is admirable to a logical, caring and sane person. I'm sure there were others before him, some of the European royalty for example, but they were inbred, so there is a medical cause for that. They also didn't have to media and social media that has allowed IQ45 so spread his face, voice, and disjointed thoughts to so many around the globe. So because of that fact, and the fact that he's simply a garbage human, it is definitely. Respectfully, I disagree. Jesus is the most influential human in history. Western civilization would be geographically different if it weren't for Jesus. That cannot even be argued. The impact that Christianity has had on the outcome of political and armed conflicts throughout European and American history is immense. One example of which is the splitting of the Roman Empire after Constantine became Christian, leaving a power vacuum in Rome and Germany as he migrated power east. Cue the rise of the Ottomans and the fall of Rome, followed by the age of kings and popes. Without popes and kings, Protestants and England as we know it wouldn't exist. Martin Luther never rebels. Europe never sees the Age of Enlightenment and Renaissance in the way we know it. USA wouldn't exist as we know it. So many downstream effects of Jesus' life that have impacted Western culture and society. Western civilization in many ways exists as an antithesis to Christian authority, but beholden to the values it espouses. There are exceptions, but in general, this is true for secular Western nations such as Germany, England, US, etc., despite each country having many Christians. I was obsessed with them when I was 13. Page was my inspiration in picking up the guitar. But when I listen to them lately I can't get over the blatant thievery, which BTW I don't think for a second they improved upon. The original blues masters did it better and quite a few were still alive and could have benefited from the money if they were credited. The Rolling Stones always made sure to credit them and even play on stage with them, and their original compositions are very shallow. Plant just overdoes it so much. His singing is very hard to listen to, and Page gave up trying to play the guitar in the 70s. Some of the live performances are like listening to a car crash. He also gave a lot of starving people jobs, and the jobs he put them to work doing we still reap the benefit from to this day over 80 years later: rural electrification, libraries, roads. He also capitalized on the emergence of radio as a more and more common household appliance to do the fireside chats. Obama would later revive this in a modern world by doing regular YouTube videos. It may seem silly, but having a leader willing to speak to the masses rather than just cozy up among their elite buddies in DC and hardly give the citizens the time of day, let alone weekly talks about the vision they have for the country and what they're trying to accomplish, is pretty nice. The only guy ever so loved and popular to win freaking 4 elections before the 2-term max was instated. Martin Luther King. Not that he doesn't deserve tremendous accolades, but it looks to me that he gets disproportionate credit for civil rights in the US because it is a more comfortable narrative to us white folks that civil right resulted due to a persuasive, passionate, and peace-loving protester. As a result, we focus on the carrot and ignore the sticks. Folks like the Malcolm X and the Black Panthers who stood up and made it clear that they were not politely asking for their civil rights were, in my opinion, pivotal. I don't believe civil rights were entirely granted from a sense of justice, but also demanded and taken by black people who were done with the bullshit. This one is going to be like smearing my dick with honey and then sticking it into a bear's mouth, but here I go. PewDiePie. I used to like his content a lot. But now, it's just really boring to watch. He never really was the best YouTuber to ever exist. There were people who innovated their content and managed to reinvent themselves far better than him. Yeah, sometimes he was the first guy to do new cool thing that stuck around for a long time. But for a couple of years, he's been falling behind, something his fanbase doesn't want to admit. The last time I watched his content was when he was uploading HLA gameplays. He is just a glorified reaction channel with a tad bit better production, and that was 75% of his content ever since the many controversies he had a few years back. Charlie, CR1TIKAL, proves that you can be edgy, funny, and innovate your content all the fucking time. Of course, he reacts, re-uploads highlights from his live streams, and makes way too many dick jokes. But what makes his content interesting is that he does whatever the fuck he wants. Riding a giant cock with a small engine and racing your friends for the best time. You have it. Reviews. You have it. Cooking videos. Of course. Gameplays. Yes. And what is PewDiePie doing? Just sits behind his PC and reacts to stuff. In the latest videos, he looks and sounds tired, like he's tired of doing the same shit over and over again. He rarely does anything different. I guess Pewds just got too tired of trying to come up with new shit. Maybe he got tired of getting into controversies constantly for his jokes. Or he is just trying to keep up with the system by constantly pushing out easy content. Either way, to me, it seems like he's had enough of this shit, but put himself into a corner, and can't do nothing else than easy Reddit reaction daily uploads. He just needs some experimentation. Maybe he needs to stop uploading daily. Maybe he needs to pause for multiple months. Maybe he should try to turn himself into a full-time live streamer for a couple of months to see what that feels like. Maybe he shouldn't take sponsorships that don't make sense. I mean, a fucking limited edition barebones keyboard and mouse bundle? Really? Maybe he should go back to playing stupid fucking games like Mr. Krabs overdoses on ketamine and dies. Maybe he should do some things he already did again, maybe finding that new spark that would kickstart his wild creative visions. But for now, he's just an overrated, glorified YouTuber whose content feels extremely forced. Ladies and gentlemen, a cotter of the secular and political elite during the 30s and 40s, textiles, the lumber industries, and the malicious leaders of the formative white superiority-themed power mongers to protect their collective interest made marijuana, opium, and cocaine illegal. Have you ever wondered why marijuana was a top-tier controlled substance? Because of the possibility for competition in those markets and the burgeoning Dust Bowl catastrophe, it was decided that white Dust Bowl farmers needed jobs and the blacks and Mexican workers were in the way of their white superiors. A campaign of brutal harassment directed at the minority workers in the western states. The Chinese railroad workers were also targeted for the opium problem because the white Americans were turning to opium in the absence of laudanum. That is the pre-ejaculate, that is the prelude to the tumescent shaft, that is the war on drugs, pounding our society whole to this day. President Lincoln. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I took a civil rights movement class in college. I swear my high school just didn't mention civil rights movement ever, and I learned that while Lincoln did in fact free the slaves from their owners, so in that sense, yes, he freed the slaves, but those same slaves that he just freed were forced by him into fighting in the Civil War, I believe, maybe another war, and obviously a lot of them died because it's the war. So basically Lincoln freed the slaves so he could use them as soldiers and kill them off that way instead. It blows my mind that this isn't talked about. Abraham Lincoln. People seem to forget the fact that he was just as racist as any other president. He was in no rush to free any slaves at all. He believed the slave problem would best be solved by voluntary deportation, known as colonization. One of the legacies of emancipation would, he feared, be 100 years or more of volatile racism. As a minority president, he found himself backed into a corner by secession, a corner from which he reluctantly took the Union to war to save it. The South started the war to save slavery. The North fought it to keep the Union intact. Like many Americans, Lincoln believed the war would be short. He never imagined it would be as devastatingly long as it turned out to be. The South would, he hoped, relent, or its armies be defeated quickly. Slow to realize no peaceful solution or wartime compromise possible, he stumbled in his choice of strategies, mostly because he misjudged the South, partly because of his ameliorative personality. Lincoln, like the presidents before him and most after, did not show through policy or rhetoric that black lives ever mattered to them outside of human capital and as casualties of wealth building. Lincoln used the N-word and told racist jokes. He once said that black people were inferior to whites and he liked minstrel shows. He proposed ending slavery by shipping willing black people back to Africa. Lincoln also once floated an offer to the Confederates that would allow them to keep slaves until 1900 if they surrendered, according to a PBS film called The Abolitionists. And at one White House meeting with black ministers, Lincoln virtually blamed slaves for starting the Civil War. If some of Lincoln's public utterances about blacks were retweeted today, he would have been cancelled on social media and likely run out of office.